Okay, stop scrolling. Spin a globe and stop it with your finger. Anywhere. Deep desert, ice sheet, an island 1,000 miles from anything. There are people there, there are people everywhere. Now name one other large animal that managed that. Take your time. You won't. And the reason is not the one you're expecting. Because the story you have absorbed goes something like this. Humans were the best, smartest, most adaptable, most capable, and so we spread out and took the planet, and everything else got out of the way or died. Survival of the fittest, and we were the fittest. I am going to spend the next 20 minutes taking that apart, and the honest version is stranger, less flattering, and considerably more interesting, because we did not outlast everything. We very nearly did not outlast anything, and the evidence for how close it was is sitting inside your own cells right now. Let's go. Start with the word in the title, because it is wrong, and it is worth being precise about why. Outlast. It implies a duration contest, and if you are going to run a duration contest, humans are not going to enjoy the results. Anatomically, modern humans have been around for something like 300,000 years. That is the general shape of it from fossils like the material at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. 300,000 years is a long time by the standards of a human life. And it is nothing at all by the standards of the things you are sharing the planet with. Beetles have been going for hundreds of millions of years. Ants have been running complex societies since the age of the dinosaurs. Sharks, as a broad group, predate trees. Crocodilians have been sitting in rivers looking essentially satisfied since long before there were primates of any kind. Every one of those lineages is still here, right now, in enormous numbers, and every one of them has been here vastly longer than us. On any honest outlasting leaderboard, we are not near the top. We are a rounding error near the bottom, and the reasonable bet, if you were an alien statistician, is that the ants will still be here long after we are not. And while we are being careful, let me kill a related phrase you have definitely heard. Living fossil. It gets applied to horseshoe crabs, to crocodiles, to coelacanths, and it is misleading. It suggests an animal that stopped evolving, frozen in place for hundreds of millions of years. That is not what happened. Those lineages have kept changing, kept diversifying, kept losing branches. What looks like stasis is usually just a body plan that kept working, sitting on top of a great deal of unseen change. Nothing has been standing still. So the duration framing collapses immediately. We are young. We are not the great survivors of deep time. Which means the interesting thing about us is not how long, it is how far. Look at the actual distribution. Homo sapiens occupies every continent. Rainforest, high desert, Arctic coast, high-altitude plateau, above 4,000 meters where the oxygen is thin, islands reachable only across open ocean. We are in places with no trees, no fresh surface water for much of the year, and no growing season worth mentioning. I should be precise here, because precision is the whole point of this channel. Antarctica is not really settled, it is staffed by rotating crews with supply lines. And several animals have very wide distributions too, but look at which ones. Rats, mice, cats, dogs, pigeons, cockroaches. They are everywhere, because we are everywhere. They came along. They are not independent achievements, they are luggage. Once you strip those out, the picture is stark. No other large mammal is even close. A tiger is a tiger-shaped habitat animal. A polar bear is an ice animal. A gorilla lives in a band of forest you could drive across, and here is this one medium-sized primate, with no fur, no claws, and a laughable bite, living in every one of those places at once. So the real question is not why we lasted, it is why we are everywhere, and the answer starts with something that sounds like an insult. We are not good at anything. I mean that fairly literally. Take any measurable capability and find the animal that specializes in it, and you lose, usually humiliatingly. Speed, strength, bite force, climbing, swimming, digging, cold tolerance, heat tolerance, low light vision, smell, hearing. In every single category, there is something out there that makes us look like an amateur. And before we get to why that worked, there is a second paradox sitting right next to the first one, and it is arguably worse. We are appalling at reproducing. Look at the numbers honestly. One offspring at a time, usually. Around 9 months to make it. Then it arrives helpless to a degree that is genuinely unusual among mammals, unable to walk, cling, feed itself, or do anything except signal. Then it requires years of active feeding and protection, and something like a decade and a half before it is any use at all. In foraging populations, the gap between births tends to run to 3 or 4 years, sometimes more. Now hold that against what we know about extinction. The animals that go extinct most readily are large, slow-breeding ones, with long generations and few offspring, because a population like that cannot rebuild quickly after a crash. Small, fast-breeding animals bounce back. Slow ones do not get the chance. Which means we have the reproductive profile of a rhinoceros and the global distribution of a rat, and those two things should not go together. The resolution is that we do not raise children the way other apes do. A chimpanzee mother carries essentially the whole load herself. Human mothers do not. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, fathers, and unrelated adults all feed and mind children who are not theirs, which is called cooperative breeding, and it lets a slow-breeding animal raise expensive offspring at a rate it could not otherwise support. There is a well-known argument here, sometimes called the grandmother hypothesis, that our unusual post-reproductive lifespan exists partly because older women who stop having children of their own and start provisioning grandchildren raise the survival of the whole line. It is a genuinely elegant idea, and I should say plainly that it is contested and not settled. But the underlying observation is not in doubt. A human child is raised by a committee. And that is not a weakness. That is the entire strategy. And it took me a while to properly understand why. Specialization is a trap. It is a magnificent, efficient, highly successful trap. If you are superbly adapted to one thing, you win, decisively, for as long as that one thing exists. A creature perfectly built for a specific prey animal, a specific climate band, a specific food plant, will outcompete a generalist every single time in stable conditions. Efficiency wins in the short run. It always does. But the planet does not hold still. Climates swing, rainfall belts move, food species come and go, ice sheets grow and collapse. And when conditions shift, the specialist has nowhere to go, because the thing it was optimized for is the thing that just vanished. Its excellence is welded to a world that no longer exists. Meanwhile, the generalist, who was doing everything badly, carries on doing everything badly under the new conditions, which turns out to be enough. This is the reframe that matters. Being good at one thing wins the decade. Being adequate at everything wins the epoch. And evolution does not reward the best performer, it removes the ones that cannot cope with change, which is a completely different filter. We are the animal that never committed. And there is a serious idea in paleoanthropology built on exactly this, usually called variability selection, associated particularly with the work of Rick Potts. The argument runs like this. If you look at the climate record for the period in which our lineage was taking shape, the striking feature is not that it was cold, or hot, or dry. It is that it would not settle. Ice cores and ocean sediments show the Pleistocene lurching, long glacial stretches broken by warm intervals, and within those, abrupt swings that could reshape a region in a human lifetime. Rainfall belts moved. Lakes in East Africa filled and emptied repeatedly. The environment our ancestors were adapting to was not a place, it was a shuffle. And if the conditions keep changing faster than a specialist can be built, then what gets selected for is not fitness to any particular environment. It is the capacity to cope with the environment changing. Flexibility itself becomes the trait under selection. That is a genuinely strange thing to have been shaped by. Most animals are answers to a question their habitat asked. We look more like an answer to the question being replaced every few thousand years. I will flag that variability selection is a framework rather than a settled finding, and reasonable people argue about how much of our anatomy and behavior it explains, but it fits the pattern in front of us better than anything else on offer. You can see it most clearly in what we eat. Look at what our species will consume: meat, fish, shellfish, insects, eggs, nuts, seeds, fruit, leaves, roots, tubers, fungi, seaweed, honey, blood, milk from a different species entirely. There are human populations that lived on almost entirely animal food and human populations that lived on almost entirely plant food, and both are fine. Compare that with an animal that requires one thing. If bamboo has a bad century, a bamboo specialist has a very serious problem. We do not have that problem, anywhere. And cooking widens it further. Applying heat to food is, functionally, a universal adapter. It breaks down things our guts could not otherwise handle, kills a lot of what would otherwise make us ill, and turns marginal food into real food. One digestive system, an enormous range of acceptable inputs. So, no specialization, plus a universal adapter, plus the willingness to walk. That is a genuinely powerful combination, and it explains the spread. And it also explains the childhood, which is the piece people usually treat as a cost rather than a feature. A specialist can largely be born knowing. If your niche is narrow and stable, instinct will cover most of it, and an animal that arrives preloaded wastes no time. But a generalist cannot be born knowing, because there is nothing specific to know. What counts as food, water, shelter, danger, and route depends entirely on where you happen to be standing, and that varies from one valley to the next. So a generalist has to be taught, and teaching takes time, and time requires somebody feeding you while you are useless. The long human childhood is not a design flaw, it is loading time, and cooperative breeding is what pays for it. Which means the two paradoxes resolve into each other. We reproduce slowly, and raise children by committee, which buys us the long apprenticeship that a species with no fixed niche absolutely requires. But none of this explains the thing I actually want to show you, which is how close it all came to not happening. Now let me take the story you have absorbed and pull it apart properly, because this is where everything you think you know gets dismantled. If you were told a species had spread to every continent and outcompeted its relatives, you would reasonably assume that species was numerous, thriving, genetically rich, spread out, robust, lots of variation to draw on. We are the opposite of that. Human beings are strikingly, unusually similar to one another. Genetically, we are a very uniform species. If you compare the amount of genetic variation across all 7 or 8 billion of us with the variation you find inside other great ape populations, we come out low, notably low. The comparison usually drawn is that a single subspecies of chimpanzee, living in one region of Africa, can carry more genetic diversity than the entire human species spread across the whole planet. Read that again, because it is the whole video. Every human alive, all of us, less varied than one regional population of chimpanzees. That is not what a triumphant species looks like. That is what a species looks like when it has been through a squeeze. Because low diversity has a specific meaning. It means that somewhere back down the line, the number of individuals actually contributing genes to the future was small. Not the number of people alive at a moment, but the effective breeding population, and estimates for our long-term effective population size land in the region of 10,000 or so. 10,000. For an animal that now numbers in the billions, the reproductive core of our lineage was, for long stretches, roughly the population of a small town. We are all descended from a very small number of people who barely got through. And this is the point where I have to be honest with you, because the famous version of this story is probably wrong. You may well have heard of the Toba catastrophe. Around 74,000 years ago, there was an enormous volcanic eruption in Sumatra, one of the largest in the last couple of million years, and there is a long-standing hypothesis that it caused a volcanic winter which nearly wiped out our species and produced exactly the bottleneck the genetics implies. It is a wonderfully dramatic story, and it has been repeated everywhere for decades. The evidence has not been kind to it. Excavations at Pinnacle Point in South Africa found the Toba ash layer in the deposits, and human occupation appears to continue straight through it without the collapse the hypothesis predicts. Work at sites in India found stone tool traditions continuing above and below the ash. The current picture is that Toba was genuinely enormous, and its effects on human populations were probably regional and survivable rather than near fatal. So the volcano probably did not nearly kill us. But notice what that does and does not change. The eruption was one proposed explanation for the bottleneck. Losing the explanation does not lose the bottleneck. The low diversity is still sitting there in the data, still demanding an account. And there are other candidates. A study published in 2023 argued from genomic modeling that there was a severe crash much earlier, somewhere around 900,000 years ago, reducing the breeding population to something on the order of 1,000 individuals for a very long stretch. I want to flag clearly that this is contested and has been challenged by other researchers. I am not telling you it happened. I am telling you that the shape of our genome keeps pointing at episodes where we came very close to ending, and that specialists are still arguing about which ones. Now here is the part that genuinely reorganized how I think about this. Our low diversity is not just a record of near disaster, it is also the fingerprint of the spread itself. When a small group leaves a population and settles somewhere new, it takes only a sample of the original variation with it. Then a small group leaves that group and takes a sample of a sample. Do that repeatedly, across continents, over tens of thousands of years, and diversity drains away with distance. And that is exactly what we observe. Broadly speaking, the further a population sits from Africa, the less genetic variation it carries. Which means the two facts are the same fact. We are everywhere because small groups kept leaving. We are genetically thin because small groups kept leaving. The global spread and the near-extinction signature are not two separate stories about our species. They are one process, seen from two angles. We did not flood the planet. We trickled across it, in small, vulnerable parties, most of which presumably failed. And then there is the question I have been circling, which is the other people. Because we were not the only ones. Within the last few 100,000 years, this planet held Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis on Flores, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, Homo naledi in South Africa, and probably others we have not found. Multiple kinds of human, at once. Now there is one. So why us? And here is where I have to disappoint you. Because the honest answer is that we do not know, and the confident answers on offer are mostly flattering guesses. It is not brain size. Neanderthal brains were as large as ours, on average slightly larger. It is not tools, because they made sophisticated ones. It is not fire, which they had. It is not care for the injured, which their skeletons show clearly. It is not symbolic behavior, which the evidence increasingly supports. Every clean answer of the form, "we were smarter," has been steadily eroded by the actual finds. What remains is less satisfying and more plausible. Demography. Larger populations, connected across wider networks, exchanging techniques and mates and information more widely, so that innovations spread and survived instead of dying with a local group. Not better individuals. More connections between ordinary ones. And there is real evidence pointing that way, which is that the Neanderthals appear to have had our problem worse than we did. When their genomes were sequenced, they turned out to be even less genetically diverse than we are, which is saying something. The picture that emerges is of small groups, thinly spread, fairly isolated from one another, across a very large range. One individual from Denisova Cave in the Altai has a genome indicating that her parents were closely related, at roughly the level of half-siblings, and the wider signal in that population points to sustained inbreeding rather than a one-off. That is what a species looks like when its local groups are too small and too far apart. Every innovation stays local. Every local disaster is a total loss, because nobody outside that valley knew what they knew. And a population like that does not need to be defeated. It just needs a bad few centuries with nobody to absorb the shock. So the difference may not have been quality at all. It may have been connectivity, and the size of the pool. And luck. Real, dumb, unearned luck about who happened to be where when the climate lurched. And it was not a war. Most people alive outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry, commonly cited at somewhere in the region of 1 to 2%. That is not the genetic signature of extermination. That is the signature of populations meeting, mixing, and one being gradually absorbed by a larger one. They are not entirely gone. They are diluted, and they are in you. Let's bring all of this together, because the shape of it is the answer. Ancient humans did not outlast everything. Ants, beetles, sharks, and crocodiles have all been here far longer and will very likely see us out. What our ancestors did was stranger. They got into every environment on the planet, and they did it while being mediocre at every measurable thing, from a founding stock so small that all 8 billion of us are still visibly related. The strategy, if you can call something so unplanned a strategy, was this. Never specialize, so that no single change can strand you. Keep your diet plural, so that no crop failure is fatal. Keep walking, so that a bad region is a place you leave, rather than a place you die. And keep information moving between groups, so that when one group is wiped out, what they knew is not. That last one is the real engine, redundancy, not excellence. Excellence is what the specialists had, and the specialists are the ones in the museums. And redundancy is an unglamorous thing to be the answer. Nobody builds a story around a species that hedged, but that is what the record shows. Not one brilliant lineage outrunning the field, but a scruffy, slow-breeding animal that kept several options open and refused to bet everything on any of them. So spin the globe again. Every one of those dots has people on it, and the reason is not that your ancestors were the best. It is that they were never good enough at any one thing to be trapped by it. They were willing to leave, and they kept talking to each other. And the reason there are so many of us, all so similar, is that the whole enormous family came through a doorway narrow enough that a small town's worth of people is the entire lineage. You are not the winner of a competition. You are the descendant of a very small number of people who nearly did not make it, and who happened to be adaptable, mobile, and in touch. Which means the thing to be impressed by is not how strong we were. It is how close it was.